Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Locher Room on this Thursday, October 5th. I'm Alan Locher. Emmy Award-winning writer Lisa Seidman is joining me today to look back at her almost 40-year career as a television writer. She has written for some of the hottest shows on primetime TV, starting with Cagney Lacey in 1984, and she's gone on to write for Dallas, Falcon Crest, Knots Landing, back to the Cul-De-Sac, to name a few. She also spent 5 years in Russia writing nighttime soaps and won the equivalent of an Emmy Award for Best Show. In daytime, she has written for Another World, Days of Our Lives, Guiding Light, One Life to Live, Sunset Beach, and The Young and the Restless. She has been nominated multiple times for a Daytime Emmy and has won for her work on Days of Our Lives and Young and the Restless. Lisa has also taught writing at UCLA, and on occasion, she still teaches at USC. It is my pleasure to welcome Lisa Seidman to the Locher Room.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Hello. I feel so old.
Not at all. You've just, had an illustrious career, and I must thank our mutual friends, Brett Stanner and Jonathan Reiner, for suggesting we chat. They speak very highly of you.
Well, thank you. I speak very highly of them.
Well, let's start with the writers. And the writers are back at work after a 148-day strike.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think it was a good or happy medium resolution?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm very happy for primetime writers and I'm happy for screenwriters, but as usual, daytime writers, the studios lately have eliminated the outline writer position. And I was really hoping to get that back, and we didn't. So that was very
writer.
Breakdown writers, yes. And so the only soap opera that has outline writers still is General Hospital. The others got rid of their teams.
So it goes from a head writer directly to the script writer?
The head writer has like 2 associate head writers or co-head writers working with him. And so, for instance, on Young and the Restless, the 2, not sure what their titles are, maybe co-head writer, Jeff Beldner and Amanda Beal, they come up with the breakdowns. And they send the breakdowns to the script writers. But my understanding is the shows are short, and because the scriptwriters can't come up with story, they're not allowed. And then it falls on the script editor to get the scripts to the correct length. So I know on Young and the Restless, it's a nightmare. I don't know what days Bold are up to.
I didn't realize Jeff was there. I know Jeff from his days on the P&G shows in New York.
Such a talented writer. He was a breakdown writer, and then Josh Griffith fired the team, but he promoted Jeff to maybe associate head writer, co-head writer. I don't know what his title
That's
is.
Awesome for Jeff. That's
yes,
awesome.
It is. It is, yes. And he's so talented, but I think so exhausted.
Well, I think any writer in daytime is exhausted. I could not imagine. I mean, what is produced in a year is really miraculous.
I know. And I've been on both. I've been primetime, I've been on daytime. And I remember once I was in daytime and I had asked to work on a primetime series, and the response was, my boss doesn't think daytime writers are very talented. And I remember thinking, do what I do for 6 months and see if you can still keep it up. I mean, you write an outline a week, a script a week. Sometimes you write 2 a week. So once on Sunset Beach, I wrote 2 outlines and 2 scripts in a week. So you try to do that on a primetime show.
Yeah. It's almost, it's like, bigger stars who come to daytime and can't do it because
Exactly.
the same
Exactly.
type of
Yes.
work ethic that we have in daytime. Well, take me back, Lisa. Was writing something you always set out to do?
Pretty much. In fifth grade, I had my best friend was Lori Goldstein, and she was writing short stories, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I started writing short stories, and then I wrote a book, historical romance, when I was 10. My parents would have me read it to their guests when they were entertaining. I still have it. It's in my
Oh my
closet.
God, that is amazing.
I know. And then I would say in high school, I always had very vivid dreams that I remember, and I started dreaming about Mission Impossible and Star Trek and stories. Like there would be plots that I'd come up with in my dreams. And I thought, this sounds so much fun. I'd really love to write for TV. And I remember I told my guidance counselor in high school, and I think he choked. And after he choked, he said, well, it's very difficult to get into, but if you do, you make a lot of money. And I thought, you make a lot of money? I wasn't in it for the money. I just thought it would be fun. So I went to college, where I discovered I was a terrible writer and finally learned to be a good writer. And then I went to graduate school, where I found a playwriting professor who had already sent a student off. She was writing for MASH. And so I wrote some spec scripts, some comedies, and sent them to her. And she gave them to her agent, and her agent called me. And I was still in Virginia, William and Mary. He said, how soon can you get here? They were making the TV show of the movie 9 to 5. And he said, the writers on 9 to 5 want to hire you. And I thought, the first person going to Hollywood who never has to starve. So I defended my thesis, took the next plane out, waited by my phone all summer until I realized I couldn't pay my rent. I called the agent. I said, what happened to 9 to 5? And he said, oh, I thought I told you those writers were fired, and the new writers aren't interested in hiring you. So that was my introduction to showbiz.
Going back to William and Mary, it was the professor who helped the other student get MASH.
Yes.
It was that woman on MASH that helped you.
Yeah, she got me her agent. And then what I didn't realize at the time is that he signed me on because he thought Karen would hire me on MASH or wherever she was. But Karen's sister came out at the same time I did. So Karen focused all her energies on her sister. And I was dropped like a hot potato. So I had to then make my way on my own, and ended up getting a job as a writer's assistant on Cagney Lacey. And eventually, Peter Lefcourt, the supervising producer, hired me to write at Cagney Lacey.
Wow.
Yes.
Go back to Lori Goldstein for a minute.
Yes.
Right? I mean, do you owe it all to her, to really just set you on that path?
Yeah, clearly I do, because she would read me her short stories, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So yes, so I started writing little short stories.
I love that. It's the chance thing of you observing what your friend was doing and the impact it had on you at such a young age, that your whole career.
Right, exactly. And I started putting on skits for my 5th grade class. So I would write scripts and perform in them, my woman shows. So it was a bit of a ham. And so that's how it all began. And
who were some of your mentors along the way? Was that professor at William Mary?
Yes, Lou Catron was definitely a mentor. And I would also say Sandy Pinsker at Franklin and Marshall, where I went to undergrad, because I took his nonfiction writing class, and I thought I was brilliant, and he did not think I was brilliant. But the interesting thing was my dad, who was director of reading for Patchogue on Long Island, he read one of my like failing pieces, and he said, Lisa, you know, you're searching for a voice that's not yours. So my father was a mentor because he showed me how to use my own voice. And then
So the undergrad professor, him being honest,
yes,
was incredibly helpful.
yes. And I'm also very competitive. And I actually think that's a good trait to have in my business. So, because there was a writer in the class, Constance Pilla, who was getting the A's. Well, I was getting the C's and the D's. And I just said, I have to be as good, I have to be better than Connie Pilla. So, but it was my dad over spring break who looked at like one of my failing papers, and he said, this is what you need to do. And it was on the difference between Palm Beach and West Palm Beach in Florida. And he rewrote my Palm Beach, and I rewrote my West Palm Beach, and I turned it in to Sandy Pinsker, and he loved the West Palm Beach better than the Palm Beach, better than the one Dad wrote. But then after that, after I realized it's okay to use my voice to be funny, that I was off and running. And so when I went to William and Mary for grad school, Lou Catron, I knew that he had mentored Karen Hall and she was on MASH. And so in my spare time, I wrote a WKRP in Cincinnati spec script, and I gave it to Dr. Catron. He gave me 14 pages of notes. And yeah, and I was thrilled. And I rewrote the script. And he said to me, now I know you're going to succeed because you took 14 pages of notes and you rewrote it and made the script better. So it's what I always tell my students is it's not writing, but rewriting. And you can't be demoralized by notes. You have to look at them and see it as a way to improve. It's not always easy, but because sometimes you don't get good notes. I was lucky with my professors that I always got good notes. And
that's incredible. I mean,
yeah,
it is for all of us. It's hard to take criticism or those
yes,
notes, but
yes,
you can use it in a constructive way, which it sounds like you certainly did.
And when I called my parents to say I was moving out to LA to be a TV writer, Dad said, you're going to write for television like I'm going to fly to the moon. And so when I sold the Cagney and Lacey, I called him. I said, suit up, Dad, you're going to the
moon. That's brilliant. What was it like writing for Cagney and Lacey and seeing that air for the first time?
That was pretty wild. I mean, I was still a writer's assistant on the show, and I really learned good writing by typing the writer scripts into the typewriter. We didn't have computers then. And so they would write out in longhand their scripts, and I would then transcribe it into the typewriter. And in transcribing, you learn what good writing is. So I found that to be very helpful. And then Peter knew me as a writer before he knew me as a writer's assistant, because when I moved out to LA, my WKRP, and I'd written a Barney Miller, he was the supervising producer on Scarecrow and Mrs. King. And my scripts got to him, and he had me come pitch. And they didn't buy anything, but he knew me as a writer. So he was open when an opportunity came up on Cagney and Lacey to hire me to write a script on the show. And I remember calling my grandmother and saying, so this is the date of my show. Are you going to watch it? She says, oh, I can't. I teach bridge that night. And I'm like, called my parents sobbing. So I think my mother called my grandmother and she found someone else to teach bridge that night.
That is crazy.
I know.
From the sound of it, and I'll ask the question that I was going to ask, but from the sound of it, it sounds like primetime TV was something you were aspiring for more than daytime at that point.
Yes. The only soap I watched as a kid was Dark Shadows.
Okay.
So in fact, I end up writing for Falcon Crest, and David Selby is on Falcon Crest. And when I first meet him, I just went, Quentin, I love you. Yes, that was me. Yeah, my goal was actually to write sitcoms. And then my scripts got to Gary David Goldberg at Family Ties. And his response was, I just wasn't funny enough, which broke my heart. But I had also written a spec Hill Street Blues. And it was the Hill Street Blues that got me attention. I think that's what... and then I wrote a spec Cagney and Lacey before I ever went on to Cagney and Lacey. And it was that spec Cagney and Lacey that got me the job on Falcon Crest, because Jeff Freilich, who was the executive producer, showrunner, knew Tyne Daly. And when he read the script, he said I had captured her voice perfectly and hired me as a story editor. So, but what happened is, so I'm on Falcon Crest, and then from Falcon Crest, I go to Dallas for 2 years, and then I go on Knots Landing for 2 years, and I'm now pigeonholed as a soap writer. And I could not get anything else and Knots was the last. When Knots was canceled, there were no more state primetime soaps on the air. Mm-hmm. And so Sunset Beach was coming. I had always wanted to work for Aaron Spelling, and Jim Sarnoff, who was an agent who kept calling me, oh, do you want to write for soaps? No. He and I went to the same college, Franklin and Marshall, but at different times. But that's how he knew me, or knew of me. And then finally, when he called again, I said, if you can get me on Sunset Beach, I'll sign with you. And he did, and I did.
That's incredible. Well, there's a fan watching Wild Sport 30K, I think it says. Aaron Spelling and you made a lot of colored our lives or something, but I'm from Russia, and we are saying thanks a lot because you show a real true love, friendship, and great hope producing Sunset Beach. We love you so much.
We were a hit all over the world except in the United States. But then they discovered they were rerunning Sunset Beach at 4 a.m. And so NBC came to us and said, we'll continue rerunning it if you'll take less in residuals. And so Chris Weitzel, who was the head writer, came to the breakdown writing team, and he said, what do you think? And I said, no. I said, if we'd agree to less residuals, we're setting a precedent. And they did not take us off the air, as they had threatened to. And so we were very successful at 4 a.m.
At 4 a.m. What was it like working for Aaron?
I had very little to do with him, but I remember he had culture shock because he couldn't understand that scenes, there would be no time passage. Like you had a scene with 2 characters, and let's say they were riding a horse across the beach, and then the next scene, it's as if no time had passed. He couldn't get over that sometimes between scenes or acts, you don't play time passages. And we got notes. Jonathan was his right-hand man, not the Jonathan we know. I can't remember Jonathan's name. And Christina would be in the room giving notes. So he was surprised that it didn't function like his primetime shows. I had hoped I could segue into his primetime shows by being on Sunset Beach, but I never got to know him, so that it never happened. But I do remember he was kind of shocked about how different the format was. So,
yeah, that's wild.
yeah.
What seasons, Douglas was asking, what seasons of Falcon Crest did you write for?
The one season, and it was the season before the last season. What happened was, after the season I was on, the Writers Guild went on strike. And when I came back, there were a new team was hired. So I didn't get to go on for the final season.
Another darn strike.
Yes. Yeah. I know. We're just filled with them.
Is there a funny Jane Wyman story I was told?
Yes. Yes. Several, actually. But me, who's such a movie fanatic, this is, to me, she was a movie star. And it was Labor Day weekend, and we weren't working. And I was home reading, and my phone rings, and it's Jane Wyman. And she goes, "Lisa, honey, I just read your script. I love it a lot. I just want to change one line." And so she reads me the scene and then the one line, and she says, "Can I change it to this?" And I wanted to say, "You won an Oscar for Johnny Belinda. You can change it to whatever you want." But I said, "Yes, you can change the line." But in later shows, actors just changed lines. They didn't call and ask you for permission.
I'm very impressed that she picked up the phone.
Yeah, very professional. But she liked me. And so we had a good relationship. There was another writer. She did not like his scripts. So she would have nothing to do with him. And then Jeff Freilich, this is hilarious, he directed some of the shows. And I remember once I was out there and he was going on, and Jane took some masking tape and put it over his mouth to shut him up.
Wow.
Yes. And I had written a mystery novel based on my experiences at Cagney Lacey, though I changed all the names to protect the guilty. I'm now writing a continuation. It's now based on my experiences at Falcon Crest, changing all the names. It's called Primetime Murder. And we went up on location at Napa Valley. So it's set on location in the Napa Valley. And yes, so be on the lookout.
Do you have a favorite thing you wrote in Primetime for Dallas, Knots Landing, Falcon Crest?
I had a favorite line that I thought I wrote for Falcon Crest, in which Eddie Albert is on the show, and at the end of his story arc, he was kind of a bad guy, and he and Jane are walking to the dining room for dinner, and he says, "What's for dinner?" And she goes, "You're eating crow." And I just thought that was the world's greatest line. Always my favorite. So wouldn't you know, years later, the president of the Falcon Crest fan club gets in touch with me. "Can I do an interview?" I said, "Yes." "What's your favorite line?" I told him. He said, "That was never in the script." I go, "I remember it. I remember seeing it." He said, "Never in the script." So it's my favorite line, apparently, of something that wasn't in the script, even though I have such a vivid memory of watching it on TV. And on Knots Landing.
And leave it to the fans,
Yes.
Really.
Yes. And on Knots Landing, my favorite was Paige's mother, played by Michelle Mamas and the
Uh,
Papas.
yes.
Yes.
Michelle Phillips.
Michelle Phillips. So her character has gotten engaged to the William Devane character, Sumner.
Yeah.
Even though Paige and Sumner was Paige's great love, and she's telling Paige she and Sumner are engaged, and I wrote, Paige says, "I'm sure your creditors will be happy for you," and that was Nicolette Sheridan's favorite line too, because then there's another scene. This is like that was the first season of the show. The second season of the show, there was a script. I didn't write it. Somebody else wrote it. And it's a scene with her and her mother again. And it was written. And Nicolette came to me and she said, could I rewrite it and write it like I had did that scene when her mother announced she was getting engaged to Sumner. And I got permission to do that. But I thought, it's one thing when there's no pressure, when you're just writing the scene and the words flow. In this case, it was on demand. And I don't know if I can come out with those bon mots like I had the last time.
It says a lot. I love that, people coming to you specifically
Yes.
and asking.
Yes. Yes. Because I always believed, and I was raised that way, I guess because it started on Falcon Crest, where the actors would come, and starting with Jane. And then on Dallas, they would go to Len Katzman, who was the showrunner.
Oh, I remember that name. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
My contact's giving me trouble.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Apologize.
And then, so on Falcon Crest, Knots Landing, Anne Marcus, who was another mentor, by the way, I should have mentioned her from the beginning. Everything I learned about structure, I learned from Anne.
I was going to ask you about Anne. So,
oh my gosh, I miss her every day. Anyway, she was a very, go ahead and write that scene. Or if Bill Devane was, he was a pot stirrer. And so Michelle Phillips came to me and she said, oh, there's a scene and I really don't like it. So Anne couldn't be bothered. So she would send me down to the set. And Bill was sitting right next to Michelle. So I knew he was the one. Otherwise, she wouldn't have. And she's saying, well, this, that, blah, blah. I was like, fine, whatever. I'll rewrite it. And so, because what happened was, what taught me this lesson, on Falcon Crest, I was in charge of rewriting some freelance writers' work, and I did a page 1 rewrite. And Jeff Freilich said, I really didn't have to rewrite the whole thing. So ever since then, I would always take a step back and listen to what actors and other writers had to say and do a very light, I would always listen to them and I would rewrite to make them happy. But when it came to freelance writers, I would do a light pass and they would be happy. So, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking with the actors and discussing their characters with them. Michelle Lee and I
know them best.
Yes. That's just it. That's just it. Michelle Lee and I think in another life would have been best friends because she got me and I got her. And so you do become friendly with some of the actors and you try to give them what they want as long as it doesn't jump the shark. So
Karen was a great character. My God.
Yes, she was. She was.
Where did you meet Anne? On which show specifically?
Which what?
Anne.
Sorry.
Where did you meet Anne? What show?
I met Anne on Knots Landing. What happened was David Jacobs, who's just died, by the way. He had hired John Romano, who was a Hill Street Blues or an NYPD Blue writer. He wanted that tone for Knots Landing, which was crazy. We're not NYPD Blue or Hill Street. We're not gritty in that way. And so it didn't work out. His story was not a hit with the fans. So David hired me for the soap opera, but it was too late. The cow was out of the barn. And so David finally fired John, and who went on to write the Lincoln Lawyer movies. So he had a happy ending, I felt. And he brought Anne back. She had written for the show before. I'll never forget our first meeting. Was it in Michael Filerman's office? And there was another writer, Jim. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. And I were like, we remained. John and two other writers are fired. And Anne comes in and she puts her hand on Michael Filerman's knee. And Jim and I were like, oh. But she came in and she pitched how to make what had already aired more into what Knots Landing is. And I thought, this woman knows her stuff. She knows her stuff. And she told me later that David said to her, you can fire Lisa and Jim if you want. But she had read the scripts I had written under John's regime, and she'd liked my work. So she kept me. And we just hit it off because I thought she was brilliant. She liked my writing. So she became one of my dear, dear friends.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Of the primetime shows, did one hold a more special place in your heart?
Each one was special in its own way. But I would say Knots Landing, because of my relationship with Anne, was very special to me. And because I so enjoyed writing for Michelle Lee, but I love Dallas, and Knots for the actors. And like once I was on set and I hear someone say something and I look and it's Larry Hagman and he's sitting next to me. I'm like, you're talking to me? And he goes on and on about his investments. I'm like, oh my God, Larry Hagman. So all of these
Major
shows,
Nelson.
Yes, exactly.
Major Nelson is talking to me.
I know. And then when Barbara Eden came on for Story Arc, and to write for her. So I remember feeling like I had fulfilled a lot of childhood fantasies.
I love that.
On each one of these shows. So, but I think not because, again, my relationship with Anne, it was, and she was president of the, not president, she was on the board of directors of the Guild. So she used to leave our story meetings early to attend meetings. And I used to yell at her. I'd say, how can you leave her in the middle of a story meeting? And she'd yell back, this is our guild. And this is important. This is our future. And then a couple of years later, she insisted I run, and I was on the.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yes.
Do you have a preference of writing for daytime or primetime?
Primetime. Primetime, very much so. Why? Partly because I think in primetime, you got to write you got to explore new stories and new relationships with these characters. In daytime, it was taking material that's been done over and over again and making it fresh. And I enjoy doing that, but you're so compartmentalized. Like all you do is write breakdowns or write scripts. And with primetime, you're part of all of it. You do both. You associate with the actors, which I like. And when you're a scriptwriter or a breakdown writer in a soaps, you don't do that.
Yeah,
and
not much contact unless it's at a party and that they're trying to get you drunk so that you spill story.
Right, exactly. Yes. So, so that's why I had preferred primetime, and I actually have optioned 2 mystery series that I hope to sell for primetime. For
Oh, that would be
Hallmark
amazing.
or Netflix. Someone told me Peacock may be interested, and I'd like to get back into primetime that way, because either series would be really great in primetime. So we'll see.
In daytime, did you prefer breakdown or script more?
Scripts,
Script.
scripts,
You
scripts.
like putting the words in their mouth.
I do. I do. Breakdowns were tough because, depending on the showrunner, it was either done for you or it wasn't done for you. And if it wasn't a storyline I loved, it was more difficult for me. So, and as an outline writer, you didn't always get a say, depending on who the showrunner was. Sally Sussman, we worked together on Young and the Restless. She, as a head writer, was always open to ideas, always. You could pitch anything to her. But other showrunners, you could not do that. They shut you down. So I rather give me the outline and I'll write the script and I'll try to make the dialogue sing. So, and also I didn't get notes. The script editor would go and rewrite, edit, do whatever needed to be done. So with outlines, I had there was an executive who was so mean to me on a show that shall go nameless, so mean to me. I remember I wanted to quit because her notes were so ridiculous. I mean, you could just tell she was trying to find things to like get me. And at one point, a co-head writer lost it with her.
Wow.
So yeah. But I ended up quitting. I mean, I just didn't renew my contract because I said life is too short.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you're working so hard in daytime,
Yes.
it's just an incredible pace.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you have written for a lot of daytime, so I love your take on the differences between each show. Like, if I say, General Hospital, how would you describe General Hospital?
I found General Hospital, at least from my end as a script writer, to be organized. I don't know that it necessarily was, but by the time the outline got to me, I was just as happy. Whatever I got, I looked forward to it. I thought the head writers were terrific. I enjoyed
Who did you work for then?
It was Chris Van Etten and Dan O'Connor.
Okay,
and yeah, I thought it was a breath of fresh air. Every show I went on, I'd always be excited thinking, oh, maybe, this head writer will have new, fresh ideas. And most of them didn't. But these guys did. I really enjoyed writing for them. But Sunset Beach was the jewel in the crown. And it was my first daytime show, and I found it to be very, very, very difficult. And Chris Weitzel was hired to replace Bob Guza. And I loved Chris. From day one, I just loved him. And I was a breakdown writer, then a script writer, then a breakdown writer. But the breakdown meetings were hilarious. And all of those breakdown writers are my friends to this day. And Chris is still a very good friend. And I remember Gary Tomlin, who was the executive producer, at one point he came in and we were just laughing hysterically. And he said to me, enjoy this moment because you don't get this on other shows. And I didn't know what he meant until I went to other shows. And I saw that it was just... people couldn't be nastier. And when I was in Russia, I was interviewed, and the journalist said to me, what do you do if you get up in the morning and you don't feel like writing? And I said, I write. Because
Yeah.
now I'm serious. I said, I'm serious too. There are like 100 people who would love my job. And so I have to get up and write. And she said, oh, in Russia, they would just drink a bottle of vodka and go back to bed, which I learned from experience. That was very true when deadlines were missed on my show. But that would just be it. I'd be so miserable, but I would hang in there and hang in there and hang in there until finally.
You aren't kidding, Lisa. I mean, there are zillions of individuals who would love your job.
Yes, exactly. And so, but then I got to be a certain age with a certain amount of money in the bank. And I was told I could quit with would be no financial hardship. So I did, and that's a lot of freedom. And then I went back to General Hospital. I went to General Hospital, and I loved it. It was the happiest 3 years.
Nice.
Writing scripts on General Hospital. Yes.
And Young and the Restless, how would you describe?
No comment.
No,
except for when Sally was on.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
you did win an Emmy.
Yes.
That's all. We don't, I'm just saying.
I know, and on Days of Our Lives for some head writers, and
well, talk about my show, Guiding Light.
Oh, Guiding Light. I moved to New York for Guiding Light. Got the greatest apartment in the world, and it was in Hell's Kitchen of all places. But
I lived in Hell's Kitchen. Where in Hell's Kitchen?
45th and 8th, the Camelot.
Okay. I used to live on I lived in two places, 48th between 10th and 11th and 37th and 10th.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I would go, I'd see a Broadway show, go to my own bathroom at intermission.
That's amazing. And I love that so much.
Yes. So Guiding Light, I was scared to death of Paul Rausch.
That's when you were. You were there when I was there.
Oh,
because I was
2001.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, because that's how I know Brett Stanner. Yeah. I was hired in like May of 2001, and what happens, and anybody who's listening who aspires. Loose lips sink ships, and I have loose lips. And I apparently badmouthed the executive when I didn't know she overheard me. So then I had a target on my back, and I could not understand why. So had been.
That's my boss, I would say, probably.
Yeah. And I didn't know why. And I just didn't know why until finally I asked one of the writers who told me, well, she overheard you badmouth her. I was like, ugh. And so Paul moved me to scripts to get me out of her sight. And it didn't work. So I think I was only a year on Guiding Light, but it led to Russia. And so for that, I'm very grateful, because when Russia called, I'd just been fired from Guiding Light.
Wow. Well, at Guiding Light, do you remember anything that you wrote that you enjoyed writing, the story or the characters?
I don't remember so much as another writer remembers. Like, she told me that I had written a wedding episode, but if you ask me, I don't remember who got married. And she said, save that episode, it was an outline, if I recall. She said, save it. That's a great writing sample.
Interesting. So, I wonder who got married. So like 2001, 2002.
Yeah. Who got
Danny and Michelle?
Could be. I thought they were already married.
They might have been.
Yeah.
I'm
I
trying to think,
yeah.
like, I don't know, I'm totally guessing, spitballing. I don't remember, but I can understand, Paul, I think, intimidated many people too.
Yes. Well, the funny thing is, he was then fired,
Yeah.
and so he went to Russia to supervise my show, Poor Anastasia. And then I got to know him, and I was less intimidated. And he was very impressed. I was a head writer. He was very impressed with my stories. And he told me that he had told this executive, you should have given her a chance. She was really good, but she was not interested. So that was, but Paul,
So did
what
he
he
bring you to Russia?
no, Sony did. What happened is my agent called me, and this was right after I had been fired. So I was sitting at my desk drooling, and my agent called and he said, I got a call from Jeff Lerner. He's an executive at Sony, and they're looking for a soap writer to go to Russia they have a show that they want to produce, a soap, and they're looking for an American writer to show them how to do it. Or would you be interested? Well, I had studied the Russian language in high school and college, and it turned out to be a historical soap, 1843 St. Petersburg, and Russian history is my thing. So my only question is, how soon can I call this executive without sounding like completely needy? And I always say, so I met with Jeff, and then I always go smash cut to the plane to Moscow. And he and I both went, and it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, and it turned into 5 years. And what Jeff realized is that the Russians needed help in directing and producing. And so first Tony Marina came over, Sally Sussman's husband, and then he had to go back, I think. So Paul Rausch came in his place, because the Russians hired theater directors, and it would be these distant shots and long sighs, and we kept saying, no, close-ups, the motion, and they were terrified of emotion, terrified. So they also didn't want to hire good-looking actors, so we had to insist they hire good-looking actors.
Wow.
And the
Are
show
you of
became,
Russian background?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so because I was curious if that's where the interest.
My grandmother was from Odessa, and I decided, wouldn't it be cool to speak Russian with her? So that's why I started taking Russian. But what happened is, when I was in junior high, the movie Nicholas and Alexandra was coming out. And I said to my mother, what's that about? And she said, oh, the Tsar and Tsarina of Russia, their family were killed in a basement, and their son had hemophilia. And I was a kid who loved reading anything about a catastrophe. So then when I learned it was based on a book, I got the book, and Nicholas and Alexandra, and that started my interest. And I said to Jeff at my meeting, I gave him the story I just gave you, and I said, I still have the dog-eared copy of that, Nicholas and Alexandra. So after a couple of years, he came to my house, and I showed him the book. He goes, oh yeah, here's the dog-eared copy of Nicholas and Alexandra.
Crazy.
So,
What was it like living there? What was it like living there?
Well, at first I was at a hotel, like the Hyatt built this luxury hotel. So it was like Eloise at the plaza. But then Russia became very expensive, so they had to put me in an apartment. And I got to choose my apartment. And that was wild, because Poor Anastasia was so successful, and Sony sold The Nanny and Married with Children, so more and more consultants, Americans, were coming to Russia. And as I said to Alexander, my Russian boss, I said, you bring the American advisors, you get Vietnam, because he was, they were all, nagging him for something. And so all of the other Americans had interpreters at their elbows. I was the only one who didn't, because Jeff, I guess, felt, well, she studied Russia for 2 years. So I was like wandering around with my minimal Russian trying to get by. And then I had a car and driver, my beloved Yuri, and he didn't speak English, but we came up with our own language. So like once I had to something with my visa, but they didn't have anyone in the office who could go with me and interpret. So they said, well, you and Yuri kind of understand each other. So we'll tell him what we need and he can explain it to you. And that's exactly what happened. Wow. So Russia was wild. It was absolutely wild. Putin watched my show. Putin was interviewed. And at the end of the interview, the journalist said, I have to ask you, do you watch Porn Anastasia? Because by this time it was a monster hit. And the journalist said Putin kind of admitted yes 2 or 3 times a week. It was on 5 nights a week. So Alexander, who just hated Putin, was so, yes, that my second show, Sins of the Fathers, had to be a thinly veiled allegory about how awful Putin is. And that show bombed big time, because people want an escape. They don't want thinly veiled allegories. They want good looking people having adventures. So poor Anastasia. Yeah, that was.
I want to read one more thing that Douglas says. Lisa's Falcon Crest episode, Obsession Possession, season 7, episode 2, is in my top 5 television episodes of all time.
Wow. Can he remind me what it's about? I have a script in the closet. Ask him, Douglas, what's it about?
Yeah, he'll respond. He's also asking if your novel is based on working on Falcon Crest called Killer Ratings.
No, Killer Ratings. Wow. That's my first novel. That's been published. That's the one based on my experiences at Cagney Lacey. Primetime Murder, based on Falcon Crest, I'm writing now.
Gotcha. That's so funny. I mean, it really, I mean, you know, soap fans, nighttime, primetime, you know, the fact that he's calling out a specific episode,
I know.
Doesn't that, you know, from all that you've written, it was Chase's funeral and Richard had just found out Angela is his mother.
Oh, wow.
Does that ring a bell?
Not at all.
It's a long time. I know. I can understand.
I'll have to.
As much as you do.
I'll have to pull out. I saved every script and so I'll pull that out after this to look at it. Once I was being interviewed by a fan of Dallas, and he said, my favorite line in all of Dallas was a line you wrote, and he quotes it to me. And of course, I have no memory of it. So I go and I look at the script. It was something Larry Hagman had ad-libbed.
That's wild. Well, if you find this, you know, send me a picture of the page and I'll post it on social media.
Okay.
You know, from all of Daytime, is there something that, you know, that you wrote that stands out from all the shows that you really, you know, loved or being part of besides Sunset? I know Sunset holds a special place.
Right, it does. I'm trying to think. There was a line I had written for Young and the Restless, and it was when Kevin owned the coffee shop.
Greg Rickhart.
Yes. And there was a woman, in fact, she had originally been on Sunset Beach, and then she was fired, and she was cast in Young and the Restless. And she came in, and he said, what can I get you? And she said, a mug of nightshade or some poison or something. And I enjoyed writing that line, and it got a special mention in Soap Opera Digest. You know, every week they would publish their favorite lines. That was that line. Hemlock. It was a glass of hemlock. What can I get you? A glass of hemlock. Yes. So I'll always remember that because it got us that mention in Soap Operas Digest. What else?
Is there a show right now that you would love to write for?
Yeah, Julia on Max, about Julia Child.
Yeah. My friend works on that show. He's
No kidding. I love
like
that show.
production
Yes.
designer, or or the unit manager.
I'm just watching the
Not
first
the production
season.
designer. He's a production manager.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just yesterday I said, wow, I wish I could write for Julia. It just sounds so fun. So, and I know it's probably not, all these things, when they make it look easy, it's really very hard. But that's the one. Primetime.
Is there one show, primetime or daytime, that was, and not because of necessarily people or like conflict, but you recall having trouble, getting into that voice or something?
I had trouble. Yes. What was it called? It was a primetime show, and I was hired to write an episode, and I don't remember it now. And I remember saying to Anne, because it was after Knots Landing, and saying to her, I am having the hardest time capturing the voices of the show. I just don't feel in the groove. It was one of these female, was it Silk Stockings? It was Silk Stockings.
Okay,
That's what
I remember that name.
And they did a total rewrite, which didn't surprise me and Anne was surprised. She said, but you're so good at capturing voices, but for some reason, I also think it's very different when you're on staff and when you're just doing a freelance episode, because when you're on staff, you're immersed all the time on the voices, the stories. When you're freelance, you can watch every single episode and you're still coming in cold, and just writing the one episode, and that's it. But that one, I just had a very difficult time connecting, getting the voices. But I think everything else, I always had a fear. I remember the first Dallas I ever wrote. I was like shaking at the keyboard, but it came out okay. And then I did an episode of Murder, She Wrote, and I knew they were not happy with my first draft, but they were kind enough to have me do the rewrite. But because I had their notes, I had a better understanding of what they wanted. And I also decided, because it's Jessica and then all the suspects, so I decided every suspect will be based on a character on Dallas. So I would use the voice from Dallas for that character, and that seemed to work out great.
I love that. There's such, things that none of us know about what helps.
Right. Yeah. But that's, if I can base a new voice on an old voice, I'm much more comfortable.
Interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
Talk about, a writer's room, being in person versus phoning it in. Must be a big difference of being in a collaborative room rather than a Zoom call. Or
yes, it also depends on the writer's room. Sometimes it would be frustrating on a show because the showrunner was so distracted with so many other things. But then you get a writer's room like with Ann Marcus, and there were really only the three of us. It was Don, no relation Marcus, we always said, me and Ann. And it was just so much better because there weren't so many voices in the room. And Dallas had a good writer's room because I had a lot of respect for Len Katzman, and you always just needed someone to be in charge. And that was Len. If he liked it, we did it. If he didn't, you didn't do it. And but sometimes, I mean, as much as I enjoyed Sunset Beach, it could be very frustrating because you had 6 voices in the room. And this was before Chris, so it was Bob Guza, and I loved Bob. And but I felt he almost gave everybody too much of a say. So that, and we, like, everybody could say something, but there was never a decision made. And I found that kind of frustrating. And sorry, Bob, you are, I do love you. And then, so I always felt it depended on the showrunner, on the executive producer, whether it was going to be a good room or a bad room. Because the showrunner had to be focused, could not be distracted, had to be able to make executive decisions, had to really understand. Now, I was the showrunner in Russia on Poor Anastasia, and I had a breakdown writing team, and I mean, I was a woman, which was against me, and I was American, which was against me. So I got arguments like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the fights, very difficult. And I mean, and someone is translating for me, although I discovered my writers knew more English than they were letting on, but I knew more Russian than I was letting on. So but I discovered, because then it was a big hit, and we'd go to Sins of Our Fathers, and that was a disaster. And it was the same writers, but they thought, oh, Poor Anastasia was such a big hit, we're not arguing with Lisa. Well, I realized they should have argued with me, because on Poor Anastasia, every story idea had an argument. And it had to, if I couldn't explain it to them in a way that they understood, then it got tossed. But if you're not arguing with me, then all the bad ideas go in.
Yeah.
And so, as difficult as
challenge, you need to be challenged.
Yes, I did. Yeah. I did need the challenge. So I had to have people challenge me, and on Sins they didn't, and now I wish they had. So
I gotcha.
Yes. So those
Lisa,
were
it is such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for spending the hour with me. And
you're welcome.
Keep in touch. If you get a project on the air, one of those movies, I'd love to have you back.
Oh, thank you. I'll keep you posted.
Please do. Okay. You have a great afternoon. Thanks for spending the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks, everybody, for watching today. Thank you to Lisa Seidman for joining us, and look back at her incredible career. Join me tomorrow at the same time, same channel, to catch up with Guiding Light's Kurt McKinney, a.k.a. Matt Reardon. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And don't forget, if you want to stream an audio version, you can search The Locher Room on your favorite streaming platform. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow.